Today's guest is a young dad who also happens to be a therapist, a school counselor, and a podcaster. Quite the combination. Teddy Stripling is a thoughtful and reflective person, and he believes that awareness is the engine of change. I believe the same thing. That was a big part of the work that he talks about with teens and families. He's a brand new dad himself, and our conversation naturally wove in reflections on fatherhood and raising a son in connection with masculinity and male mental health. Teddy and his partner have already started those big talks about your core values, what they want to pass on to their son, and what kind of a future their son might be living in, and how to lay those foundations now. One moment I especially loved was when he was talking about reading all the parenting books, knowing that what he was doing in that moment was what he should be doing, what all the experts said to do, and it not working. There was a plan. His son had different ideas for that plan. Teddy decided to choose and trust his own instincts. And he learned that by being patient and being in the moment, that he could be a better parent. And as a result, also a better therapist. It's something that he's deeply committed to, being present in the moment and really paying attention to what the person sitting across the table from him really needs. It's a great conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I did. Too many boys today feel lost, alone, and misunderstood. Too many parents feel the same. Behind today's troubling statistics is a generation of boys longing to be seen, heard, and valued. And yet the conversation around boys' emotional lives is still far too quiet. This new season of Unlocking the Parenting Code is here to change that. This season, you'll hear more real conversations with young men, more expert voices on boys' mental health, more solo episodes where I share truths I've learned firsthand, and more wisdom from parents walking this road right now. It's time to open our eyes, open our hearts, and become the change our boys need. Boys aren't broken. They're waiting for us to truly see them, hear them, and stand with them. So tune in to Unlocking the Parenting Code for real conversations, real hope, and a new path forward for our boys. It's time. They're ready. Are we? Welcome back to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. I'm your host, Kathy, and today I am welcoming Teddy Stripling. Teddy Stripling is a school counselor and therapist in Chicago. He practices from a Gestalt approach, centering much of his work with adolescents, children, and families. He presents at conferences in the Midwest and nationally in the U.S., and consults with schools to help support youth with diverse needs. He's also the host of the podcast Talking Emotions. I'm excited to delve into your work today, Teddy. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Teddy, if someone were meeting you for the first time and wanted to really understand who you are, not just what you do, what would you want them to know?
Oh, that's such a tough question. Who am I? It's funny because that's the question I'm always asking the teenagers that I work with. If you were just to ask me, like, who am I outside of just the professional world, I'd say I'm a hiker. I'm a outdoorsman, and I am a curious mind. You can ask some of my close friends. I am probably always learning a thing, and if I am not, reading something or not watching something to learn something, I'm trying to get out there and do something. So I've got very limited free time right now, particularly with some house remodel stuff going on, but I am learning a ton about how to do gutters right now. So that's my curious thing that's going on right now.
Well, you kind of sound like a like-minded soul there, so I'm sure we're going to have a good conversation. Um,
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah.
what's kind of your backstory? Like, how did you get to where you are and what you're doing today?
Yeah, great question. It was a little bit of a winding path, if I'm honest. I didn't really have a firm idea of exactly what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be a chef when I was in high school, and that kind of led me down the road of nutrition or food science. And that didn't kind of take either. I remember just kind of changing my mind my junior year of college and being like, I don't really want to get yelled at for telling people they can't have salt in their diets, which was what was happening at my internship. So I kind of just found things. And I remember for graduate school, I graduated in '08. It was not a great time to graduate at a college because there weren't a lot of job opportunities because the housing market just crashed. Um, and I remember I was looking for something in like bank marketing, couldn't find anything, and I was trying to find any job doing anything. And so I did what most other people would do, which is to say, like, I guess I should go to graduate school. So I had a lot of friends that were going to law school, a lot of friends going to business school, and I kind of was following suit. I was like, well, I guess if you want a job, you got to go into business if you're not trying to be a physician. So I was applying for business schools, and I had a really good friend of mine who was at University of Indiana. And I remember I was applying for the business school, and he said, "Hey, come out for the weekend. I'll show you the school." And then when we were talking, he said, you don't really sound like you want to be in business." I was like, "Well, what else am I going to do for a career? What else am I going to do for a living?" And he was like, "Well, it sounds like you like really like helping people, from volunteering to the stuff that we did, different projects like during spring break and stuff during college." He was like, "You actually really enjoy helping people. Have you ever thought about the helping professions?" And funny enough, that entire weekend was me asking about how to kind of explore what career options were in that world. And it, funny enough, led me to us talking and saying, well, I'm gonna continue to apply for business school, but then also look in counseling. And so I was applying to both at the same time, and I ended up ultimately going to school for counseling, which ended up being the career that I've been in for over 10 years. So you could almost call it happenstance, or you could call it divine intervention. It feels like it's one and the same. But yeah, I kind of by chance fell into this role. I don't know. It's such a funny thing for me because it wasn't very linear at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of have a similar story where teaching was a fallback because I couldn't afford to stay in school for social work. And it was
Mm,
just plan B till I got myself figured out, and then one thing led to another, and it was like this is exactly what I should be doing, and this is what, kind of fills my soul. So it's interesting how those things happen, eh?
right, right. I mean, it'd be really nice if it was just linear and, I woke up one day and knew I was going to be an electrician, and I just was an electrician for 35 years and stopped being an electrician and retired. But I imagine it's pretty wobbly for most people.
Yeah, yeah, I would think so. Anyway, that,
Mhm.
that I could go a whole different direction there, but I'm going to pull myself back in here. Okay, so you told me a little bit about the work that you had done in the schools and that you had worked with children right from early years up through high school, and currently you're
Mhm.
working with the older adolescents and families in your
Mhm.
private practice. So I was really curious to know, like, have you noticed any patterns in how the emotional needs of, I'm thinking especially boys, but how the emotional needs evolve from those stages? Like it's very different an early years little boy to a elementary school boy to a teenage boy to an adult man.
Oh wow. That's a very loaded question. I'm gonna see if I can do my best to try to answer that. Um, I think going back to my experience of being in um, some of the younger schools with younger students, a lot of my time, I think, was spent where people would kind of just like bring me a student and say like, "Hey, get them to stop doing this thing." Basically like get them to stay in their seat. or like get them to stop crying, or get them to like know how to work with people. Fix my kid, in essence, I think was sometimes under that current of what people were saying. And a little bit of that is the role of being a counselor in a school. You were there kind of as a responsive measure in the building. But when I kind of think about that kind of as broad strokes, it was a lot of my perception was like I felt like I had to like fix kids and like okay if they were being disruptive, I had to get them to stop being disruptive. But I think as I had got a lot more experience, I really just kept remembering that it was like being able to connect with the student to really try to understand who they were a little bit. And I think that helped my work early on because it helped me to understand what was going on with students. And thinking about that kind of like broad strokes, man, like what was the biggest theme? I think it was probably that was really taking a step back to try to understand who the students were. And then once I could connect with them, then I could kind of work and collaborate with their teachers to see what they needed. If I was a teacher and I had 30 something kids in my classroom, I think it would be really hard for me to take a pause and be able to do that. So I can't fault a teacher, you know, that, sometimes like, hey, like help me out because it's like they're trying to manage 30 something kids. And then me, I can kind of come in as a partner once I get to try to help them navigate on supporting this kid and getting them a little bit of what they need. So I think that was probably one of my biggest things early on with the younger kids. Um, and I think you were asking a little bit about that, like transitioning to older students. And I was thinking, man, right now, anxiety, 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 particularly in the school that I'm at. It's a really high performing school. A lot of students are going to, selective enrollment schools and some, really highly selective schools across the country, some even internationally. And there's so much pressure that the students feel, regardless if that comes from parents, from themselves, from the community. But there's so much pressure that the students feel to have to do everything so that they can get into these places. And while, all of those things are amazing that they're aspiring and stuff like that, sometimes the question becomes like, at to what cost? And also that like going to this place like is not a defining feature of who you are. It's one aspect of who you are, and what are the other pieces of you that make you who you know, like that Erickson who am I question, that developmental stage. You're just a student that works hard. That's not who you are. That's one aspect of it. And really getting students the space to really kind of explore that, I think has been a lot of my work as I work with students because they're so anxious about that process of like where they're going to go, what their grades are, all those other things too. Hopefully, I did my best to trying to answer your question. I think I might have talked to a couple of different places.
No, no, those are good answers. Um, it made me have more questions. Um,
I'm sure. Yeah.
okay, so recently in this new season, I've been interviewing young men. Currently, the ones I've interviewed are all around 30 years old, and we talk about a whole bunch of different things connected with mental health and all those different issues and
Mhm.
challenges that young men might be facing today. But the one thing that kind of sparks everybody is when they start talking about their school days. And because that's been my career, like I spent just over 40 years, most of it in the classroom. And so I understand how that happens. I don't think that the school system is really geared for the natural way that males learn. And especially in the younger years, early elementary, what tends to happen, from my opinion, and then from now what I'm getting back from a lot of people rather than just my own son, um, because it's not set up for success for them, basically, it ends up interfering with a healthy sense of self-esteem and self-worth. So
Mm.
when you're talking about working with these adolescents and men that come into your practice, like, do you see any patterns of things that started then that just have continued to kind of grow and fester and maybe leading to things connected with shame and anger and frustration?
That's a really good question. I'm thinking of individual anecdotes, and then I'm trying to think just kind of as an aggregate in my experience. And maybe where my brain is kind of gravitating to, hmm, is thinking about, like I'm just, you were talking about males, and I'm thinking about it, this idea of just like being like hyper or like moving around. And you had mentioned that like there were that schools aren't necessarily designed for young males. And I'm thinking about like the kid or the little boy that is in his seat that's just like he gotta go. He's like in his seat and he's just like, no, 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 let me bounce. And you take me back to like a lot of some of the behavioral things, like little like fidget spinners and the bouncy kick rubber band on the chair, about a lot of these like stimulus things to help someone with a lot of energy be able to kind of like sit in a chair for 6.5 hours. And I think that kind of gets to the point that you were saying, which is like, man, maybe schools weren't designed for high energy boys or high energy girls for that matter, to be able to do school because, in kindergarten, everything is so play based. And depending on your school can be very play based too. They're, Montessori schools and schools that do a lot of activity and self-interest learning. But the traditional school is sitting in your seat and listening. And I think that kind of maybe gets to what you were just saying. It's like that experience of like shame and doubt and self-esteem starts to get in my wheelhouse. And I can think of so many anecdotals. There was a student when I was working in LA, and he was a student just really had a tough time kind of like being in place, if that makes sense. And I remember in our work when I was doing some individual conversations with him, I think he was like maybe like third or fourth grade, something like that, was really just trying to get an idea of like what he noticed his body was doing. Because sometimes he wasn't even aware that he was doing things like he was out of his seat and he'd be like, "What are you talking about?" He just found his mind and his body was wandering. And that gets him in trouble, or that gets him, next to his friend, and then he's like goofing off, and it gets him sent to the principal's office. And I think what you highlight is a really important idea that if there's a student that is really struggling with the environment of being in a school, like that can have an impact on your self-concept and, your self-worth because like you want to be in that space and you want to learn and you want to connect with your teacher. And I mean, that's kind of the basis of shame. I know it's a little bit maybe outside of what we're talking about, but um, I think I heard it best from like Sylvan Tompkins on like script affect theory, was talking about this idea of like shame is basically this want to connect and there's a break. And so you have to like figure out what to do because you want to connect with someone. And so in repeated experiences of that, that what they call it, the compass of shame. You can
Mhm.
attack other people, you can attack yourself, you can withdraw from people. I forget the fourth one off the top of my head right now, but anger is one of those. Withdrawal is one of those. Blaming or attacking other people is one of those. So, these are all different behaviors that all are kind of based on or can be based. It's one way of looking at it that they could be based in shame or, not having a great self-concept because you want to be in that space and it's a struggle. Um, so I remember working with him, and that was one of the pieces that was really tough because, like, how do I collaborate with a teacher when a structure in school is for 6.5 hours? Probably about five of it, he's going to be in his seat. So when we worked, a lot of what we did was we spent a lot of time working on what he noticed and what he observed. And then we'll try to collaborate with the teacher a little bit on like cues for him to start to help notice what he was doing. Does that mean he was never out of his seat again? Absolutely not. He certainly was doing that, but it raised the teacher's awareness that that was something he was struggling with. It wasn't just a student that wasn't trying to get right. And so that helped them build a little bit of a relationship. He started getting sent to the office a little bit. But then the other side was from a, developmental level, he was starting to raise his awareness of what he was doing because, elementary school kids can be goofy sometimes. They're not always aware of their body space and will be like right next to somebody. But he started to build an awareness of when he was like, not paying attention or looking the other way or fiddling with other stuff or like out of his seat and stuff like that. He started to build that awareness. So I think that anecdote brings me back to what you were saying, which is like, man, that's a powerful experience to have if you're in an environment where it's not set up and you're really struggling. But then the other part is like everybody, has to figure out how to navigate a space, right? But if there's not support to kind of help you get back to that, I think this is really a place where like, that's a really sweet spot to intervene. It sounds like you might have been interviewing a lot of kids that struggle with that and didn't really have that connection to even help try to navigate it when there was something that wasn't working right in that space.
Okay, I want to take it a little bit personal because I knew a whole bunch of things about children on a professional level
Hmm.
based on education and experience. But it was when my own son went into the school system
Mm.
that I had a different perspective. So now knowing that you are a fairly new father of a little boy, has that shifted or deepened how you think about or how you work with, boys or adolescents or parents? Like, what's the impact of you becoming a father?
Oh man. Number one, I think is I'm more patient.
Hmm.
I'm more patient. I'm known as the sleep police in my house because I'm like, oh, it's time. And sometimes he's not on board with that. And I remember I had a really, really tough, it might have been an afternoon or evening, I can't remember, where, I knew it was time for him to go to sleep. He knew it was time to go to sleep. And he was tired and he just wouldn't go to sleep. And it was a really tough moment because I was like, I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing all of the things that I need to do. And I have to like pull back everything that I'm like, no works or everything that I like have researched that you're supposed to do as a parent and take a step back and say, well, what's happening in the moment and how can I adjust? And I remember that was a really, really, really tough moment for me because um, the story ends up working out. It was at night. I remember now because I ended up bringing him out of his room and we just sat there in the dark and he was just like playing for, I don't know, maybe like an hour and a half. And I just leaned into it. I just sat there in the dark because it's nighttime and just kind of interacted with him. And I was silent so that like the moment that like he was starting to show sleep signs, I'd be like, cool, we're going back into the room. But I had to pivot from what I knew I was supposed to do to being responsive to what was happening in the moment. And I think that was a really big learning experience for me because it was like, oh, like, you can be doing everything right. And in that moment, like, that's not what's needed, which is really, really weird, right? And I think that's like a level of patience to try to get outside of what is going on. Or if you're like, you're on the way to the store, you're trying to meet up with friends and family and you're running an hour and a half behind because a baby does what a baby does. You have to be patient. So I think I have a lot more respect for how much patience you have to raise a child.
It's almost definitely you need a lot of patience and a lot of
Mm,
grace for yourself. But when you were talking, it's like one of the things for me, one of the biggest things was really deeply trusting my own instinct, even when the
mm,
experts said this, or, my best friend who's got, five kids, she said this. It was like the bottom line was having enough confidence and courage, really, to just, I have a knowing that, I should be sitting up for, until my son is ready to go to bed. This is what feels right in this moment, even though all the books say something else, and going with that. I think that's where real growth is as far as a parent, when you can just start
mm,
to trust your instincts and really be curious. Like instead of putting what you think is the best for your son, so you're going to push that agenda, instead of that, you just get really curious and kind of, okay, well, my idea is not working. What's going on in that little guy's head and body, and how are we going to get through this moment? But it's a okay, one of the I'm thinking about, in 5 years' time when your son is starting kindergarten or grade one,
mhm,
and things have changed. And I must say, I don't know as much about national school systems as I do about international school systems. But I
mhm,
remember when I started, the first teaching position I had was grade one. And that was like a long time ago. I won't say the year. Um, but the curriculum at that time was those children were coming into grade one as their, most of them, first experience. There wasn't preschool. There wasn't kindergarten. Like that was their first experience coming into an institutionalized educational system.
mhm,
And my job as the grade one teacher was to teach them that by the end of the year, they should know their alphabet, they should know their numbers, they should have some concept of what reading is and what phonics is. But the biggest thing was how to be together in a classroom. And that was at grade one.
mm,
I still sometimes go in to do substitution work in the international school.
mm,
And in the 3-year-old class and the 4-year-old class, they're further ahead academically than the grade ones were many years ago. Like the curriculum
mm,
has just, in my opinion, been pushed down and down and down. And it's not that they can't do it, because they can. Most of the kids in kindergarten are reading at least at a grade one, if not a grade two level. So it's not
mhm,
that they can't do it, but it's kind of at what cost? Like,
mm,
are their social skills being developed? Is their worth, self-worth and their self-esteem, is that being developed? And so when it comes to your own child starting off in that system and you see him going in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and so excited about everything, but because it's not really set up for his kind of learning, little by little, it chips away at him. And it's a very confronting experience as a parent. Have
mm.
you thought anything at all about that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've been thinking about that. Maybe not as early as like kindergarten, first grade. Um, but I think, yeah, I've really thought about it from high school perspective. I mean, I'm in a high school right now, and I just think about the question that me and my partner have been really talking about has really been from a values perspective. What are going to be some of the bigger values that we want to hold and try to instill in him? And thinking about that, our values could either be, if we're talking about from a systems, right? Like we've got, like him, he's got his own little stuff going on. We've got the little family, and then we've got the school, and then you've got the community at larger, right? And there may be some values that we'll have that could be in conflict with what the school values. And so, which ones are going to be most important for us to try to see how to navigate that. I think that's a big question that we've been wondering about because, there might every school has a different environment and they value different things. And so, we were thinking like, man, like if he's not the strongest student, or if he's like, like reading's fine, but like I hate math, I don't really care about it. Like, do I want to send you to a STEM school that's really going to be really rigorous and you're going to have to struggle with that because that's what you have to do to graduate through there? It's a really tough question to sit with. And I know, like, and being in a place like Chicago, um, it's such a charged conversation about where a eighth grader is going to go to high school because those environments are so different. And trying to get to a selective high school means it's, got a better track record of getting you to a selective college. And so you've got all of those pressures that kind of align with that too. And so I think as for me, I really sit with thinking about, I know that there will be some of that conflict and like, how are we going to navigate that? Because if it's going to be in the academic realm, if it's going to be in the social realm, if it's going to be, um, like some of the like some schools they really highlight that they value having diversity or they value kindness or they value academic rigor or they value some of these other things. What are going to be the ones that are most central for us? um we're talking through that right now. I don't know that I have the answer. There maybe we're like, I think in both of us, we're real big nerds. And so we're like, we want them to read. We want them to be a big reader. And a little bit of that is us setting that culture for us in our home, that we're always reading, that he sees us reading, that we read with him, that when he gets to a point he can read, he'll hopefully pick some of that up, that we create environments where reading is fun and it is enjoyable. And what school could be a really good partner in that for us, because sometimes you might be at a school where it's going to push him a little bit more. Other schools, maybe he's going to be further along and he's going to be bored and he's going to be in the corner reading. These are big questions to really sit with. And I think as a parent, those are really big questions when you have a kid. They like get really real. So when you ask that question, I was like, oh yeah, I'm in the thick of it right now. I don't have the answer.
But that's just it. Like we can all be experts in certain things, and then someone brings it back to, well, what about, deep and personal, and you have a different light on it. Um, but I think when parents have those discussions, either when the child is really young or even before the child is born, when you have some of those questions, it just kind of gives you it's like that lighthouse, it's got you going in a direction if you've had some of those
Mhm.
conversations and like you are raising your child in a generation that is moving even faster than the one that we raised our son. But I
Mhm.
remember because we did have those conversations too. But I remember it was the same thing. I do not know what his world is going to be like.
It's a good
It's
point.
not the same. And so it was very, like I was really clear. Like, so what can our values, our core values be that are going to have an impact on him regardless of,
Mm.
if there's flying spaceships, when he's, 22. And it came down to the same thing, like reading and the love of reading. That was one of them. That was high on the list because that just opens a world for everything, absolutely
Mhm.
everything. Another
Mhm.
one, I had four. Reading was crucial. The other one was music. No matter what,
Oh, it's a good one.
the power of music can bring you up, it can take you down, it can let you share
Mhm.
your emotions, it can give you energy, it can help you relax. Music is, so that was always a focus in our family as well. And the other thing was about understanding about, physical, like activity. So when, your emotions are running wild, you can go for a run or you can go walk in the woods or you can something where you're using your body. And so I wanted him to understand that. And what was the fourth one? Don't remember, but those three I remember clearly. And those were so important because no matter what world he became part of, he could
Hmm.
always use those three things to help his mental health, help his physical health, and his social environment. So those conversations when your children are young just gives you a guiding light. And I think they're really important.
Oh yeah, I absolutely.
Okay, so I probably should be talking a little bit more about your what you do. So okay, so let's
Oh,
so
you're
you
good. I was liking these tangents. I was like, ooh,
so
hit me with
yeah,
some zingers.
I go on tangents for sure. So we've talked about this a little bit, but you've been trained and certified and published in a bunch of different professional areas, from anger management to executive functioning. But I was really curious, like, is there one particular belief or value that guides your work, not your personal life, but your
Hmm.
work, more than any other technique? Like you said, you're really like Gestalt, the Gestalt approach is primary in your work. But is
Hmm.
there any belief or a value that takes precedent in how you do your work?
If I were to make it a value, it's funny. I was in a training this past year, um, in Gestalt. It was advanced training for that, and one of the conversations I remember in our one of our cohort conversations was about this idea that everything that you do in a therapeutic space like has a value. And to like say that you don't have one is really kind of, being misleading because you have a certain approach and, you are setting the space to tell someone, hey, this is the approach that I use. If you use this approach, you can get better. That's a value, right? And so when you were sitting with that question and asked me that, I laughed because I was like, I know you brought me back. And I think from what I take from that conversation and what you just asked, I'm thinking about awareness. That awareness is really a key engine for being able to hmm, make change. Maybe that's the best way that I can summarize that. So awareness is really key for life. Um, and so a center of my work, regardless if it's doing work around anger or if it's doing work around executive functioning or if it's doing some work around shame, or even grief and loss. Um, a big part of what my work does and the Gestalt approach really goes back to trying to build a sense of what you notice in your body through your senses. Because the more that you can build a vocabulary and an awareness for those things, that it allows you the really useful information to understand what it is that you might need, and so that allows you the space to be able to make decisions. I'll leave it at that because I realize I could talk for a long time about that.
But I really agree with you. I think awareness it's like the first step. And until you take that first step, then you can't get to the golden part of anything. Like there has to be that awareness there. Um, One of the things that you wrote in your intake form was something about reducing shame and increasing adolescent self-concept. So, in your opinion, why is shame such a dominant force in teen life today?
Mm, there's probably 1,000 different reasons why. Um,
But why more today?
hmm, if I had to make a guess, maybe my thought is that, oh man, hmm, I'm not gonna say you've stumped me, but there's a lot of different reasons. I don't think it's just one, but this what seems to be kind of a trend is that anxiety, it just kind of on a huge level is really increasing across the United States. And irrespective of the pandemic, it didn't, the pandemic ended, or, it hasn't been at pandemic levels. And anxiety didn't kind of just like kind of ramp back down or stabilize with it. It continues to raise in adolescents. And, is that due to, social comparison and the rise of social media? What was it? The US Surgeon General created a report in 2023, I believe it was, where they were talking about really the dark side of social media, and that you have all of these things that can be dark sides of that, like social comparison, etc. So I would argue that that is definitely a big component of it. And, the other part of that is that, you know, the teenage years are really kind of a turbulent time. It's not this, kind of linear path of just like knowing yourself, trying different stuff, going to classes, getting a job, hanging out with friends, and then you're like, oh, this is who I want to be. It's kind of this up and down process. And, when you mix that in with social medias that we didn't really have to contend with before this, really at any other time in human history. It broadcast that to the world, when before it was broadcast to your circle of friends or maybe an assembly when everybody else was sitting there. And it was just kind of your struggle that you had going on in obscurity. Now that doesn't really exist. Now one post can be seen by the world. So it's kind of a little bit of a different world. If I had to make my best educated guess on why anxiety and self-concept may be a big part of that, is that social comparison is very different than any other time we've experienced in human history.
Yeah, I just a few weeks ago finished that book. It was called The Anxious Generation. Can't remember
Oh
who
yeah.
the author is, but that's what he was talking. He had some good information in there, like trying to make sense of, what's happened since what he calls it, the instead of a play-based childhood, it's a phone-based childhood for
Mhm.
so there is a lot with that. Sometimes too, I wonder about the family unit, like how much of that is having an impact, because parenting has definitely changed. And it's interesting how it's changed and the impact that it might have on children.
Yeah. Um, this is, of course, from my anecdotal experiences, and I can't kind of say as a trend or what I've noticed in the literature, but that piece of what you said, parenting is a little bit different. There's this idea of the helicopter parent. It is certainly something that I've experienced in the last couple of years. And will I say that it's on a uptick? Possibly. I want to say possibly. That, that a parent might be kind of hyper involved and wanting to solve the problems of that a student could face, or, the obstacles that kind of come up naturally through, being in school and going through all these other things. And I think you highlight a really good question, which is like, man, how is parenting different today than it is from you know, my generation. I'm an 80s baby. Um, I remember kind of just like being able to just like go outside and then just like coming back like before the street lights came on. Truly
Yeah,
is
yeah,
what my rule was as a kid.
yeah,
Was like, oh, like you're not home yet? Like, why are you not home? The lights are, oh, I'm at my friend's house. Oh, okay. Well, you need to come home. You got an hour, that kind of thing. There is anecdotally, it doesn't seem like that's the experiences that a lot of students that, I've worked with have had. Certainly, there still are a few that have experiences like that. But, home or, you got a cell phone next to you all the time. And so there's instant knowledge of where you're at and what you're doing at all times. Um, I think, we kind of were just like there were probably people that spotted us in the neighborhood because people knew each other on the block. But other than that, like we would just leave and just pop back up. And I remember doing that as early as maybe like fourth or fifth grade.
Hmm.
So it seemed like there was a lot of freedom. We also got hurt. We would scrape our knees up and get bruised and banged up and get in trouble sometimes. But um, that allowed us to be able to navigate the world and build a sense of confidence when stuff didn't go right because you kind of had to figure it out. Um, so I don't know. Maybe these are just some of my anecdotal opinions, but I think that certainly could be a part of it.
Yeah, well, I was raised a lot earlier than you were, but there's still it almost now when you're talking about those kinds of things, it's well before the cell phone or after the cell phone. It seems to be that's
Mhm,
kind of the divide in a lot of things. But a lot of parenting too, another issue that I find with children and their sense of self-esteem and their level of anxiety or whatever,
mhm.
the level of or the lack of time. Like kids are overscheduled, you
Oh, I
know,
was gonna say, tell me what you mean. I'm glad you clarified that.
like they're on the go all the time. Parents put so
Hmm.
much time and effort into driving them to this thing, taking them to this thing, making sure they're enrolled in this one. And the role of the parent in that way definitely has changed. And a lot of parents, well, no, I shouldn't talk like that. A lot of parents. There are parents who, like, I think every parent does what they think is the best for their child because they love them, more than
Hmm.
anything else in the
Yeah,
world.
yeah.
But like, I've seen a child as young as 5 years old. I can tell you a classic burnout situation where that little one would not get out of bed because she was just exhausted from a few years of between going to, the just right kindergarten so that she'd be getting into the right elementary school, taking all the extra English, the extra math to make sure she could boost
Hmm.
up. Like this is before she's 5 years old. And
Hmm.
this little one really, she just at one point one day just stopped. So it's like we do what we think is best, but the core things of childhood, like I don't know how many kids really get to explore that, go down to the river with your buddies and hopefully you won't drown, but make that raft and
You got me thinking about something. You took me to some writing from, oh my goodness, I'm having a mind blank. The name is going to come to me as soon as I start talking about it. But she wrote a lot about anxiety and particularly with teens, and then she wrote a lot about girls and anxiety as well. I'm so mad that the name is slipping me right now because she's got some fantastic books. Psychologist, I believe, based outside of Cleveland, definitely in Ohio. But she talks about this idea of like really trying to like unpack the why and this idea that, oh, like if I got to make sure this kid gets these experiences so that they get into this class so that they can have this school and that experience in kindergarten. Why? Because it's important that they get to a good high school. Why? Because they can get to a good college. Why? So they can get a good job. Why? So that they can do this. Why? So they can be happy, right? This unpacking the why is like, what is the purpose behind all of those things that, as a parent, you have this great, amazing like goodwill and wanting to do this for your kids and unpacking why it can be security, it can be so that they can be happy. And when you start to unpack that, you know the the actions don't necessarily mean that they'll add up, right? Like you can have a job and be a millionaire and be miserable. There are very many high paying jobs that have you know high suicide rates. I'm thinking of like lawyers. Um, those are fantastic jobs. They're also very demanding. And just having a good job like that can bring you security. It doesn't bring you happiness. What's the number? It's like 70 or $80,000 a year. You have all of your needs met.
Yeah.
And so you are in a Maslow sense, you are happy to a degree, but it doesn't give you any psychological happiness. You have to figure that out outside of all of those other things. So starting sometimes like when I work with parents, like I start there and, really helping them kind of see that why, but then also once they have that why, bringing it back to what the kid is doing right now, because some of those things for them to be busy are things that they love. Hell, that's great. And do you have to have all of it? Because there's a lot of greatness in being bored. Because when you're bored, you have the opportunity to figure stuff out and to tinker and to wonder. That's that default mode network stuff when your brain is just kind of there and you're like, oh, what about this? And you make a game up with your friend. And then for years, you guys play WrestleMania on a trampoline because that's just what y'all did. Maybe I'm speaking my experience. But like having those times where you're bored can be really great because it's your brain having the opportunity to really be creative, and you can stumble upon some great things. I think what you said is a really helpful, thought, which is, man, are we overscheduling our kids right now? I'm sure there are plenty of researchers and writers that would argue that we do. Um, and the miss of that is that you miss that opportunity to be bored and create, but then also kind of figure out like, all right, cool, like I'm bored, like what do I want to do? And you get that opportunity and that space to kind of explore like what you actually do want. Maybe you try some things out, you're like, I hate skateboarding. That was me. I learned I didn't really like skateboarding. It was hard. And I found something else I wanted to do. But because I was bored, I tried stuff out like that. That's just one anecdote.
Yeah, I think boredom is a superpower you can give your kids. Like they should.
But if we think about that from a context of like social learning theory, right? If you want your kids to, you know, just sit back and relax a little bit. They're like, Mom, I had not seen you do that. You are always on the
Mm.
go. You're always running a million miles an hour, looking frazzled and just sitting on the couch like, thank God it's 8 o'clock. I can eat something and just stare at the TV for an hour before I pass out. It's really important to model those things too. I mean, like you had asked me a question about things that I think about with having a kid. And I think about that a lot too. It's just like, how do I model balance? That's something that I've been struggling with in the last year. Just lots of different commitments and trying to do a podcast and research stuff and any of these other things and my curious mind. How do I make balance? And if I can't model that, man, he might kind of learn like, oh, I got to be like that too. I don't know. I wonder about that sometimes.
Well, I can tell you for sure that our actions have much more of an impact than our words do
Hmm.
without without any hesitation at all. That's
Hmm.
definitely the way it is. I'm trying to be mindful of the time here, but there was part of your work too is connected with identity. And so
Hmm.
when I'm specifically thinking about boys and how their identity develops as they're growing up and the impact that things like, shame and embarrassment and the educational system and anger and anxiety, all of those things. How like what is it about identity that you focus on or that you see or that you help in particular help boys with? When I was raising my son, I longed for a guide, something real, honest, and grounded in what boys truly need. So I created the book that I wish I'd had. Packed with tools and real world strategies that actually work, you'll learn how to nurture his emotional world and finally understand the feelings behind his behavior. Because boys don't need punishment, they need guidance. We'll bust the myths that keep boys boxed in and help you support him through the real challenges of growing up. Most of all, it's about transforming your connection, one small moment at a time. Raising boys who become remarkable men. Get your copy today and let's create a beautiful future together.
Mm. I want to go in 1,000 directions with this question, and I can't. I have to follow an arrow. Um,
I'm okay if you go in a whole bunch of directions.
no, it's okay. I'll try to be, answered in a way where people are like, huh? Or as opposed to like, oh yeah, yeah. Let's see. Identity in males. Oh, there's a good like man, you're bringing me to like all these other books that I've read. There's like Boys and Sex that I read. I had an interview with Sarah Casper who was talking about the problem with consent and consent education. Is it this binary of like you get this yes, you get this no? And like if we just start there and we're talking about identity, all right? We get these notions of what it means to be a man in really subtle ways and in really overt ways. And, shame is a really, really powerful engine for that. So, like, let's stick with one example. Boys don't cry, right? So, if you are getting this message that boys don't cry, this is a message that is just kind of external out there in the world. And when someone talks about that in a space where emotions come up, oh man, people like talking about their feelings. Hey man, no, I can't talk about that, right? This is something completely external to you, but you've internalized this message to say that I can't do that because I'm a man, right? We get that message from our grandparents, we get it from our teachers, we get it from the person at the grocery store, um, and as a little kid, and we internalize that because like our world kind of tells us that that's what we should and shouldn't do. Now, what can be the problem with that? The problem with that is that, you know, if we wholeheartedly take that internalized message in that like boys can't cry, like okay, sure, that's going to help you when you've got to navigate a tough situation, or you have a conflict with someone, or you have to navigate through really hard times because it's kind of like you have to be firm to do that. But you can potentially miss these opportunities where being vulnerable can allow you to connect with someone, right? Let's say you're in a conversation with someone and you're trying to troubleshoot something, you might feel like, oh, wow, I can't like show you like that. I don't know what I'm talking about right now. Like boys can't cry. You might not be so responsive to a partner when, they're going through something. And man, if you can like show some emotion there, that's a really powerful opportunity to connect with someone. Um, or if you have grief or you have loss, you've lost a family member, you watched someone in a close family member pass, you've seen something really traumatic. You can't show that you are affected by that because you've internalized this message. Now there's this tension that's in your body between what you feel internally, what your sensations, and you're all right. I'm going back full circle what these things are that you actually feel in your body versus what you feel like you can express. So if I watch, one of my good friends pass, I can have sadness, I can have loss, right? But then I can't express that out. So I have to find a different way of manifesting that. And man, are those emotions still there? Possibly. Can you live with them? Possibly. But if you have like a more organic way of sitting with and what you experience, then it allows you the choice. Can I open up and show my vulnerability in this moment? Can I express my like sadness? Can I show my vulnerability to someone? those are really powerful moments. And it doesn't build so much tension physiologically in your body when you have to do that. That's a huge opportunity for growth. That's a huge opportunity to connect. That's a huge opportunity to release physically tension in the body. And, just because of that one little interject, you know, that can really restrict your opportunity to really do a lot in terms of being able to connect with other people and grow. So when I work with people, that's a lot of times what kind of comes up. You took me to a conversation when I was working with a eighth grade student. Um, he was referred to me because he was getting into trouble with some people. He had fought a bunch of students in his school, and then he started smoking weed and got caught smoking weed with some of his friends. And his mom was like, "Hey, like I can't have this. Like he needs to see a therapist." And in our work, a big part of our work when we first started actually wasn't being like, well, why are you fighting? Why are you hitting other people? Hey, tell me what your world is going on. And I think there was this one moment where I just kind of took a step back and I was like, man, like it's normal to fight. He was like, wait, what? Um, he's like, I was like, yeah, like you gotta fight. Like it sounds like if you're not doing that, then like people aren't gonna like take you in. He was just like, yeah, you gotta be hard. And so like that opened up our conversation where we really sat and unpacked about what is and is not okay to do as a man, right? He's in eighth grade. He's not a man yet, but he's trying to get there. But this interject has been sitting with him since he was. Sorry, I'm getting into my Gestalt stuff. This idea of what it means to be a man is outside of him, and he kind of internalized that. So we kind of pull it out and we kind of like interrogate it, right? Is this true all the time? Sometimes you got to be hard. You got to fight people. And does that have to be the case all the time? And so like we can kind of like inspect that. Kind of like, like a I'm trying to think like a peach. Like if you eat a peach, you're not going to eat the peach wholeheartedly. That pit in the middle is going to be really hard to digest. It's really fibrous. But if you eat all the peaches and all the pieces that are really good, you feed yourself and you throw away what you don't need. In essence, that's what we would do. We kind of talk about like, where does this idea of being hard come from? What's useful for it? And like, when does that get in the way? And do we have to take in all of that? And so that's building awareness, but that also is talking about, one of those ideas of being a man, talking about boys can't cry. I talked a lot. I'm gonna stop.
Oh, you said a lot of uh,
Yeah.
um, powerful stuff. Tell me, what's your definition of, what's it mean to be a good man? What is healthy masculinity?
You know, that's a really good question. And I think it possibly could mean trying to understand what a lot of those major roles that people say like means to be masculine. Like if it means like being strong, if it means being competitive, if it means being a leader, if it means any of these things, then really kind of interrogating those ideas and understanding what can be useful about it and what can be harmful about it. I think that's probably for manhood something that I've really been thinking about is like, there are some really like great parts about being a man, and there can be some really, really harmful, damaging parts. And so if you can interrogate some of those ideas, then when you're in situations with people in, an office meeting or in a conversation where you're trying to navigate, how to solve a problem in your relationship, like it can really be useful to be able to kind of take a step back. So I think it's really being able to like build an awareness and trying to interrogate some of those ideas. I mean, I think I'll make it personal. And I remember like being in college and thinking that like to be like a man, like I had to like get swole. And so I just went to the gym all the time. And I thought like the idea of being a man was like being this like impenetrable like force, just like super swole and stuff like that. And that's not quite it. Um, that's a very narrow idea of what it means to be a man. And like when you can really unpack that, like what's important about being strong? What's important about having muscles? What's important about being a solid person? Like that can be really useful if like, it's really useful to like be a consistent and solid person. I'm thinking in a family, right? If people are like, I don't know what to do, you're like, hey, it's gonna be okay. We got this. I don't have to have muscles to do that, right? But that can be a huge dark side too. We're like, nah, I gotta be a man. I gotta be hard. I have to have muscles. And it's like, no, because then you're impenetrable and then you can't connect with people because you're too busy trying to hold to this ideal of being so like solid that you can't even allow yourself to be connecting with other people. That can be really damaging. So I don't know, interrogating that idea. I don't know.
Have you, like, are you familiar with what they refer to as the boy code or the man box?
Possibly. I'm sure I am in some way. What does it mean?
Well, the boy code, it was something that was the first time I heard the term, it was from a book of Dr. William Pollock, and it was called Real Boys, and he's got a men's institute out of Harvard, and he's just, and that's in the 90s, I think that started. But what he says is basically the boy code are the myths that society has about boys, and there are in general there are three myths. One is boys will be boys, boys should be boys, and boys are toxic. So boys will be boys is connected with testosterone. So,
Hmm.
they are the way they are, but what that often does is create situations where we don't hold them accountable for things because we say, "Oh, it's a boy thing. That's just
Hmm.
boys." The
Hmm.
second one, boys should be boys. That's talking about what you were just talking about, being strong and stoic and falling into what society says this is what it means to be a man. Like you don't
Hmm.
show your emotions, you don't express. The only acceptable emotion really is anger. Anything else is vulnerable, you stay away from it. And there's just a whole bunch of things about that. And then the third one, that boys are toxic, is really, you know, they're a danger to society. And especially for, females, they're something that you need to be cautious of and be protected from. So you take those, and the important thing to remember is those are the myths. None of them are true. But what seems to happen, like in today, they're talking about, the male crisis and the loneliness epidemic and all of these things. And I keep thinking, if you've got a little boy growing up in a society where he's getting bombarded with those messages all the time, maybe not from his family,
Hmm.
but from the world that he is growing up in.
Hmm.
So then when you get a boy when he's like a teenager or a young adult and he's coming to you because he's anxious, he's depressed, he's angry, he's not grounded. He's lost and he comes to you. How do you help him with those things? Like maybe this is where, you talk a little bit about your Gestalt approach to things, but how do you help that young man who has had those messages drilled into him by society? And I really do have to emphasize that it doesn't, even if the family is really aware that those things are out there and do what they can to, mitigate that kind of response. When the child grows up through society and then they get older, the peers are really important to them. They internalize some of those messages that are being given. How do you help them?
I still think it's relatively the same in that idea of building awareness. So, this there's this idea basically of field theory. And I'm not gonna go into detail about that, but that's one of the kind of major tenets of Gestalt is it was one of the ideas was field theory is that everything exists in an environment, right? And you've got this organism that exists within this environment from a psychological perspective, like that's us as humans. Like we exist not in a vacuum. We exist in this world. And so we got to go into the world to be able to get these things that we need. And we also take in messages from the world as well. So, this idea of like getting these messages from not in the family, but in the world, that's a very real thing. So if we just take these messages and these myths that you just referenced, and we take those things wholeheartedly, man, like you're gonna do a lot of damage in this world, running into those or like holding on to those myths without interrogating them. And so, you know, for me, when I work with students, particularly if I'm working with a male and I'm talking about these things, like I wanna I wanna basically like exaggerate what's happening out there to really try to interrogate some of that stuff, building that awareness, right? Like, like, oh, okay, cool. Like, that's something that, like you had this thing happen and you didn't cry at your granddad's funeral, something like that. I'm trying to think of an example, right? We can exaggerate that to really try to interrogate what's connected to that. And so once you have the option to be able to look and see what some of those pieces are that you might have taken in, that's a really great opportunity to build some awareness, and that gives you the freedom to make different choices. Now, will you all the time? I think a lot of that comes to your environment. If you're in an environment where, I mean, I go back to this eighth grade student that I was working with, he was in a tough school. And like the hidden code, not a male code, but the hidden code, because girls were fighting, um, was that like if somebody like attacks you, you gotta attack them back. That's just what you have to do. And so in practice, what I do with students is really unpack those kind of hidden rules that exist kind of out there in the environment and see like what they want to do about it and what they can. Sometimes they can't in their environment, but because in this space we can kind of explore and unpack some of that, it might be the only space they have to be able to even process that. Because not everybody has a space where they can say, oh, you know what, let me interrogate, you know, um, this idea that just like boys are toxic. All right. Like maybe there's, a guy that's like talking about like how he doesn't really like his friends, but I don't know, there's his friends and his friends are just acting wild. And he's like, I don't know what I want to do. He's kind of stuck in that. How does he navigate deciding on what he wants to do on changing his friend circle or trying to confront his friends? He can do that in that space with me because we're unpacking some of these things. And so I think I would go back to starting there again and looking at their experiences and what they're going through, and then being able to exaggerate it so that we can really interrogate some of these ideas connected to it. Building that knowledge helps them make some different choices.
Yeah, that's really important work.
Mhm.
And that can transfer for parents too. Like I said, it doesn't need to be that, the home environment promotes those myths. But the same
Mhm.
thing, it's kind of like if you start talking to your son, say when he's struggling in school, no matter what age, if you can, create that awareness of, maybe it's not you, maybe it's a system, it's going to allow for conversation and for just processing what's happening to them maybe a little bit better.
Mhm.
But I think that kind of work that to help people delve into it the way that you're talking about it, I think that's really important. Okay, I have
Mhm.
definitely gone off on tangents here, so I'll
You're fine.
apologize for that. But I wanted to, okay, the last question that I will ask you, I'd like you just to I was really interested in your podcast, Talking Emotions, and it says it's for teens, parents, and providers. So, like I know what inspired me. I want to know what inspired you to do it, and if there's any one episode or one story from episodes that you've had that really still sticks with you.
Mm. Great question. Um, how did I get into podcasts? I'm a creative. I like making stuff. I play guitar, piano. I used to paint, watercolors. I'm a creative person. And I think my brain has, when the more I've become comfortable with me being like that, the more that I've really enjoyed my life. And so I create things all the time. I was talking with a friend when I was in Virginia, and we've been good friends for probably about 10, 12 years, something like that. And in our conversations, I had talked about doing something like a podcast for years. And when I was in Virginia, he said, "You've spent all of this time. You've got an idea what you would do." He's like, you even have thought about names. And, you know, one of the things that I know about you is that like you can do something that you've spent time thinking about. He said, "Why would you not do this podcast?" And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I have to like interview people. I have to buy a microphone. I have to do all this other stuff. He was like, "I got a microphone." I was like, "Well, do you want to be the first person I interview?" So that was my first interview was with my good friend. He's in a doc program at William and Mary. And we talked about career exploration for teenagers and young adults. It was really fun. But I think I'm in this world of mental health, and I kind of in a really weird, like there's tons of school counselors. There's some school counselor podcasts, but I don't know that there's a ton of people that are doing both that are like in the schools and also in private practice. So the idea was really just to explore ideas on what help people for their emotional wellness, but not necessarily just only for adults. It was like, hey, like we've got this segment of people that's huge. And anybody that's working with teens or young adults, these ideas could be really useful. So that's kind of where it came from.
Oh, I think it's brilliant. And I think it's just um, it's such a beautiful opportunity to reach more people. Like if you don't put it out there, you can't help as many people.
Yeah. And it's kind of fun.
It is fun.
You asked the second part of your question was like, is there any was there any episode that stuck out with me? And it's not for just for the content. The content was stellar. It was Mary Lamia. We talked about motivation. And the reason why I referenced that is because I had been reading her work for years and had been doing it as a part of my practice. The Sylvan Tompkins, all the shame stuff.
Mhm.
She wrote on that and had published a bunch of books related to shame-based work, more for therapists than for the general public. But I really loved that book because it transformed how I thought about doing work with kids. And when I was interviewing her, I just had this moment where I was like, wow, like she's impressed that I'm doing this podcast. And I feel like I'm just sitting here having like a fanboy moment. I'm sitting here and I'm just like, we're talking ideas. You wrote this book and you want to talk to me? And I just remember like the end of that episode, I just kind of was just like on cloud nine for like 3 weeks because I got a chance to have a conversation with someone that I really admired for their intellectual work. And I think that really opened me up to being like, I don't care if I get one or a million listeners. This is great because you really get to unpack ideas, and I think that's something I really enjoy.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
Before we finish today, Teddy, is there anything that we didn't? I know there's a lot of things that we didn't talk about, but is there anything in particular that you wish we had have talked about?
Oh no. I kind of like the idea that we didn't go in blind, but we went in a completely different direction. I had in my head, I was doing a lot of rehearsing on some of my old notes that I've done for presentations around anger, and I was really surprised that didn't come up. But I'm glad because we ended up talking about the identity piece around manhood, and I really enjoyed that that came up too as a theme. So I'm cool with the way that it went. I love it.
Well, I really enjoyed talking with you and I like sometimes how I know sometimes scripting things is good. I always have it scripted, but then I don't always stick to the script. And this is definitely an interview that I did not, stick to any script. Where can listeners connect with you or learn more about the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a website. It's present-mind.org. That's my therapist private practice website. It also has a link to the podcast as well, which is Talking Emotions. I do have an Instagram thing, but I don't use it because I'm a little bit of a grandpa with that. But if someone wants to just Google Talking Emotions podcast, it'll pop up. You can get it on Spotify, Apple Music, any of those typical places. So those are the two ways that are going to be best to reach out to me if you got questions or want to just listen in.
I know I'll be listening and I'm going to look for that one on motivation. That's what I'm going to do this afternoon.
It's a good one.
Thank you very much, Teddy. I know how precious time is, and I hope that you feel that I've honored yours today. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you, and I'm sure there are lots of things in this conversation that people will be able to take away and put to good use in their own lives.
I surely hope so. And thank you for asking me to be on here. This is great. I appreciate the time we had.
It was my pleasure completely. And thank you to our
Um,
listeners for joining us on Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. Be sure to check out Teddy's links in the show notes and don't forget to subscribe, share, and tune in next week for more conversations about raising boys. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Every conversation we have here is a step toward raising boys who feel seen, heard, and deeply valued. If you're looking for more support on this journey, I invite you to visit me at sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. And as always, thank you for being part of this important movement. Until next time, take good care.